All right, so ever chug water after a salty meal and like wonder where it all goes?
Hmm.
Well, today we're going deep on how your body handles that precious H2O,
Yeah.
kidneys. We're sifting through Dr. Rasha Eldeeb's physiology notes.
Oh, cool.
She's the expert, we're just the guides.
All right.
Get ready for some cool facts about like how your body knows when you're thirsty
Okay.
and how your kidneys do some water-saving tricks, like this thing called the countercurrent mechanism. Sounds complicated, but trust me,
It's amazing.
it's brilliant.
It really is so complex, like mind-boggling how our bodies regulate water.
Okay, let's start basic. Why is water so vital?
Yeah.
We know it's good for us,
Yeah.
but what makes it so special?
Okay, think about this. Water is like the ultimate multitasker inside your body.
Okay.
Like Dr. Eldeeb points out, it's this fantastic solvent, meaning it can break down and transport all sorts of substances, like nutrients from your food. And get this, it even plays a role in how your lungs function because of its unique surface tension properties.
Whoa, so water is like the unsung hero of our respiratory system. I never knew that.
Exactly. And that's not all. Water also helps regulate your body's pH balance, acting as both an acid and a base. Talk about a balancing act. And of course, we can't forget its role in temperature regulation. It's why we sweat to cool down. Water's heat capacity and its ability to evaporate make it a powerful cooling agent.
Okay, so water is involved in tons of processes, but let's talk about where the real action happens.
Yeah.
The kidneys.
Yes.
They're like the master regulators of our internal water world, right?
Absolutely. And they handle a mind-blowing amount of fluid every day. Get this. Your kidneys filter about 180 liters of water daily. That's enough to fill a bathtub several times over.
Wait, 180 liters. Are we basically like turning into human water fountains every day?
Not quite. Here's the fascinating part. We don't actually pee out all that liquid. On average, we only excrete about 1.5 liters of urine daily.
So where does all that extra water go?
That's the magic of the kidneys. They're incredibly efficient at reabsorbing most of that filtered water back into the bloodstream. And this reabsorption process is carefully orchestrated, happening in different stages as the fluid travels through these tiny, winding tubes called nephrons.
Okay, so imagine we're a water molecule on a wild ride through the nephron. Where does our journey begin?
Our adventure starts in a section called the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT for short. This is where the bulk of the water reabsorption takes place. Around 60 to 70% of that 180 liters gets reclaimed right here.
Wow, the PCT is like a water recycling powerhouse. But how does it actually pull that water back in?
Think of it this way. The PCT acts like a bustling marketplace. It reabsorbs essential substances like sodium and glucose from the filtered fluid, and water naturally follows them, like a crowd of water molecules rushing to catch up with their friends.
So it's not like the PCT is consciously deciding to reabsorb water. It's more about water tagging along with these other substances.
Exactly. At this stage, it's what we call obligatory reabsorption. It's not directly controlled by hormones. But as we move further along the nephron, things get a bit more complex and those hormonal signals start to play a bigger role.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happens next in our water molecules journey?
Things get a bit more twisted, literally.
Oh,
The next stop is the loop of Henle, a hairpin-shaped structure that dips deep into the kidney.
loop of Henle. That sounds more like a roller coaster than a part of the body. Why this crazy shape? What's the point of this loop-to-loop?
This loop is key to the kidney's ability to concentrate urine and conserve water. Remember, the goal is to reabsorb as much water as possible while still getting rid of waste products. And to do that, the kidney needs to create a super salty environment, kind of like a brine pool, deep within its structure.
A brine pool inside our kidneys. Okay, that's definitely not something I learned in high school biology.
That's where the loop of Henle comes in. This loop is essentially building that brine pool, but in a super clever way. To understand how it works, we need to talk about the countercurrent mechanism, one of nature's most brilliant engineering feats.
Okay, you mentioned the countercurrent mechanism earlier. I'm all ears. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Imagine you have two pipes running side by side, but the liquid in each pipe is flowing in opposite directions. That's the countercurrent part. And in the kidneys, this setup creates a concentration gradient, a difference in saltiness between the fluid inside the loop and the surrounding tissue.
So it's like setting up a salty trap to pull water out of the loop.
Exactly. And the loop of Henle does this in two parts. First, the thick ascending limb of the loop actively pumps out salt, making the surrounding tissue super salty. This is like laying the foundation for our brine pool.
Okay, so we're pumping out salt, making things extra salty. I'm following so far.
Right.
What happens next?
Well, remember that descending limb we talked about earlier? That part is highly permeable to water. So as the fluid travels down the descending limb, it encounters this increasingly salty environment created by the ascending limb.
And because water likes to move from areas of low salt concentration to high salt concentration, it flows out of the descending limb and into the surrounding tissue. It's like the water's being pulled towards the salt.
You got it. And that's the genius of the countercurrent mechanism. It's not just a one-way street. As water moves out, the fluid inside the descending limb becomes more concentrated, which then allows even more water to be reabsorbed as it continues down the loop. It's a self-perpetuating system that constantly maximizes water reabsorption.
Wow, that's incredible. Our kidneys are basically engineering their own environment to make sure we hold on to as much water as possible. It's like a natural water-saving technology. But what about the other substances in that fluid? Don't we need to get rid of those too?
Absolutely, and that's where things get even more intricate as we move on to the later stages of the nephron. The distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts. That's where hormonal control really kicks in, fine-tuning the reabsorption process and making sure we maintain the perfect balance.
Okay, this is where those hormones we mentioned earlier, ADH and aldosterone, enter the picture, right?
Exactly. And those hormones are like the conductors of an orchestra, making sure everything is in harmony. They're responding to signals from the body about overall fluid volume, blood pressure, and even electrolyte balance.
This is already so much more complex than I ever imagined. I can't wait to learn how these hormones orchestrate the final stages of water regulation and how our bodies ultimately know when to signal, hey, I'm thirsty.
Well, let's continue our deep dive and unravel those mysteries. So we've journeyed through this incredible water recycling plant, the PCT,
Right.
taken a wild ride through the loop of Henle, where the kidney makes its own salty oasis to draw out water. But the story doesn't end there. Time to talk about those hormonal maestros you mentioned.
ADH and aldosterone.
Exactly.
Okay, so picture this. We're still that little water molecule cruising through the nephron. We've just navigated the loop of Henle, and now we're heading into the distal convoluted tubule,
The DCT.
the DCT. What's the vibe here? Is it still all about salt?
The early part of the DCT is kind of like an encore of the thick ascending limb. It's still focused on reabsorbing salt, and it's pretty much watertight. But as we move along, things start to shift. This is where aldosterone steps onto the stage.
Aldosterone, that's one of the hormones we've been building up to. What's its role in all of this?
Aldosterone's like the meticulous manager. Fine-tuning sodium reabsorption in the DCT and collecting ducts basically tells the kidneys, hey, hold on to more sodium, which in turn influences water reabsorption. It's all about maintaining that delicate balance of electrolytes and fluid volume.
So aldosterone is indirectly influencing how much water we retain by controlling sodium.
Clever.
But what about ADH? I feel like that's the real star of the water regulation show.
You're absolutely right. As we move into the collecting ducts, the final stretch of our nephron journey, ADH takes center stage. Think of it as the ultimate water conservationist.
Okay, I'm visualizing ADH in a ranger hat, patrolling the collecting ducts and making sure not a single drop of water goes to waste.
That's a great image. ADH acts on these special cells in the collecting ducts, making them more permeable to water. This allows more water to be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, depending on the body's needs.
So if we're dehydrated, ADH swoops in, makes those collecting ducts extra absorbent, saving as much water as possible.
Yes.
And if we're well hydrated, it eases up a bit.
Exactly. ADH is like a volume control knob for our urine concentration. It's constantly monitoring the body's hydration status and adjusting water reabsorption accordingly. But here's another fascinating twist. ADH also affects how the collecting ducts handle urea, that waste product from protein metabolism.
Wait, urea. That stuff we're trying to get rid of is somehow involved in water reabsorption.
It might seem counterintuitive, but urea actually plays a supporting role in that super salty environment we talked about earlier, that medullary brine pool created by the loop of Henle. Remember how the descending limb is permeable to water but not to urea?
Yeah, the water flows out, but the urea stays put, right?
Right. So as water is reabsorbed along the nephron, the concentration of urea in the remaining fluid increases. And when we reach the collecting ducts, some of that urea can actually pass back into the medulla.
So it's like urea is being recycled back into that salty environment to help maintain the concentration gradient. It's a team effort.
Exactly. Urea and salt work together to create that osmotic force that draws water out of the nephron. It's a brilliant example of how our bodies use even waste products to their advantage.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about how our bodies even know when we need more water in the first place.
Thirst.
Thirst. It's a feeling we all know.
Yeah.
But what's actually going on in our brains when that dry mouth feeling hits?
Well, that feeling of thirst is orchestrated by a thirst center located in the hypothalamus, a region of the brain that's like the control center for a lot of our basic bodily functions.
So it's not just our mouths telling us we're thirsty, it's our brains saying, hey, we need more H2O. But what triggers that thirst center to send out the drink up signal?
There are two main triggers, both related to changes in fluid balance. The first is cellular dehydration. Essentially, our cells are getting a little parched.
So our cells themselves can actually sense they're low on water? That's wild. How does that work?
It's all about osmotic pressure. When the concentration of solutes in the extracellular fluid, the fluid surrounding our cells, increases, it creates a kind of pulling force that draws water out of the cells.
So the saltier the fluid outside the cells gets, the more water flows out of the cells to try and balance things out.
Exactly. And this change in osmotic pressure is detected by specialized osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. They're like tiny sensors that constantly monitor the saltiness of the extracellular fluid.
So it's like a direct line of communication from our cells to the thirst center. Hey, we're shrinking over here, send water, stat.
That's a great way to put it. And what's fascinating is that the blood-brain barrier, which usually acts like a gatekeeper protecting the brain, is actually leaky in the area where these osmoreceptors are located.
Leaky. Why would that be? It seems risky to have a leaky barrier in the brain.
Well, this leakiness is actually crucial for the osmoreceptors to do their job. It allows them to be super sensitive to even small changes in the osmolality of the extracellular fluid, ensuring a quick response to even subtle signs of dehydration. Our bodies really have thought of everything.
That's incredible. But you mentioned there was another trigger for thirst, right? What's the other scenario that gets our brains craving that glass of water?
The second trigger is what we call extracellular dehydration. This is when we lose fluid volume, not necessarily because of changes in solute concentration.
So it's not about things getting too salty, it's about losing fluid overall. I imagine things like hemorrhage would fall into this category.
Exactly. Though it's important to note that something like donating blood, while it does reduce blood volume, doesn't usually trigger thirst.
Okay.
It's more about a significant and rapid loss of fluid, like in cases of severe bleeding, vomiting, or diarrhea.
Got it. So how does the body detect this kind of dehydration if it's not about saltiness? Are there different sensors involved?
You're right. It's not about osmoreceptors in this case. Instead, it involves baroreceptors, which are pressure sensors located in blood vessels, and volume receptors, which are found in the heart. These receptors are like the body's pressure gauges, constantly monitoring blood volume and pressure.
So if blood pressure or volume drops too low, these baroreceptors and volume receptors sound the alarm, signaling to the brain, hey, we need to replenish fluids over here.
Exactly. And these signals are relayed to the hypothalamus, triggering that thirst response.
It's amazing how our bodies have multiple systems in place to monitor hydration and make sure we're staying topped up. It's like a finely tuned orchestra with different instruments all playing their part.
It really is. And this intricate system highlights just how crucial water balance is for our overall health and well-being.
So we've covered why water is so essential, how the kidneys act like master regulators, and how our brains know when to signal thirst. But I'm curious, what happens when things go wrong? What about those times when we're sick, battling a fever, or sweating buckets after a tough workout? Do these regulatory mechanisms kick into overdrive?
That's a great question, and it's a perfect segue into the final part of our deep dive. Let's explore how our bodies adapt and cope with those challenging situations, ensuring we maintain that crucial water balance even when things get tough.
So we've explored this wild ride of water through the nephron.
Yeah.
Hormones like ADH and aldosterone, making sure everything's in sync.
Keeping things balanced.
Right. But what happens when we throw a wrench in the works?
Oh.
Like when we're sick with a fever or sweating buckets after a tough workout,
Yeah.
how do our bodies even handle those extra challenges?
Okay, well, think about what happens when you have a fever.
Okay.
Your temperature rises, and you start losing water through sweating.
Right, because sweating is how we cool down.
Yeah.
But it also means we're losing fluids.
Yes.
So are we basically talking about like double dehydration?
Yeah.
Both cellular and extracellular when we have a fever?
Exactly.
Okay.
This double whammy triggers both thirst,
Right.
that intense urge to drink,
Right.
and the release of ADH to conserve water.
So it's like your body's saying, hold on to every drop.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just about replenishing the water we've lost through sweat.
Right.
It's also about preventing further loss by making our kidneys work extra hard to reabsorb water.
Yeah.
It's like a two-pronged defense strategy.
Precisely, and the same goes for exercise.
Oh, yeah.
When you're working up a sweat,
Right.
your body ramps up thirst and ADH production
Okay.
to compensate for those fluid losses.
It's all about staying ahead of the game,
Right.
keeping that balance in check.
Yeah.
It's amazing how adaptable our bodies are. But what about external factors that can disrupt this balance? Like, think about medications.
Oh, yeah.
Do any common meds affect how our kidneys handle water?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Medications can definitely play a role.
Okay.
Think about diuretics.
Yeah?
They're often prescribed for high blood pressure,
Right.
and they work by increasing urine output.
So they're basically doing the opposite of ADH,
Exactly.
encouraging the kidneys to release more water
Right.
instead of holding on to it.
Yeah.
That makes sense for high blood pressure,
Mm-hmm.
but I imagine it could lead to dehydration if people aren't careful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act, and it highlights the importance of talking to your doctor
Oh, yeah.
about any medications you're taking,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're concerned about hydration.
To make sure you're staying properly hydrated.
Yes,
Yeah.
especially if you're taking meds that affect your kidney function.
Good advice.
Oh,
It's a reminder that even simple things like meds can have complex effects on our bodies.
yeah.
But I'm also curious about medical conditions that can disrupt water balance. I know certain diseases can affect how our kidneys function.
Absolutely. Conditions like diabetes can significantly impact water regulation.
Okay.
In diabetes, high blood sugar levels can actually spill over into the urine,
Oh, wow.
taking water with it.
Okay.
This can lead to excessive urination
Right.
and dehydration, even if someone is drinking fluids.
So even if you're trying to stay hydrated, a condition like diabetes can make it much harder for your body to hold on to that water.
Yeah.
It really shows how interconnected our body systems are.
It does, and it highlights the importance of managing those underlying conditions.
Right.
If you have a condition that might affect your hydration,
Yeah.
it's crucial to work with your doctor to monitor your fluid intake
Okay.
and stay balanced.
This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for the complexity of water regulation
Yeah.
and the amazing job our kidneys do every day.
It really is a remarkable system.
It's like we've been taking that simple glass of water for granted,
It's easy to take for granted until something goes wrong.
right? We've explored the journey of water through the nephron, the hormones that orchestrate the process,
Right.
and the delicate balance our bodies strive to maintain.
Even when faced with challenges.
Exactly. It's a reminder
Yeah.
that there's always more to learn about the body.
And that even simple things like staying hydrated
Yeah.
involve so many complex processes.
That's a symphony happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So next time you reach for that glass of water,
Hmm.
take a moment to appreciate the journey it's about to take
Yeah.
through your body
That's right.
and all the systems that work to keep you hydrated and healthy.
Pretty amazing.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those brains hydrated.